What if Marlene hadn't told Joel that giving Ellie the vaccine would cost Ellie's life? What if Abby had killed Ellie instead of Joel? What if Ellie hadn't forgiven Abby in Santa Barbara? Would the fate of the entire story have changed? The Last of Us told not only the story of the darkness brought by the outbreak, but also of hope and the most fragile bonds of humanity. Joel and Ellie were like an unexpected father-daughter relationship blossoming amidst misery. Their journey meant more than just survival. It was the story of two souls who healed each other's wounds and found refuge in one another. However, some of the difficult choices made in the game changed the course of its universe forever. This is a universe where fate shifts at 3 different breaking points, and nothing remains the same. What if Marlene hadn't told Joel that giving Ellie the vaccine would cost Ellie's life? Some decisions not only exact the price of survival, but also make every burden we carry heavier forever.
They were actually going to make a cure. The only catch, it would kill her.
Jesus Christ, Joel. What do you do?
I saved her.
In the ruthless world of the apocalypse, Joel Miller's soul had long since left his body. That is, until he met a little girl who was immune to the cordyceps infection. At the request of the Fireflies to take her to their hospital in Salt Lake City in hopes of a vaccine, Joel's mission was to deliver her safely. Every moment they shared along the way wove an invisible bond between them. Joel began to see Ellie as a new light in his life after losing his daughter Sarah. When they arrived at the hospital and the painful truth was revealed, it turned out that Ellie had to die for the vaccine.
A vaccine?
But it grows all over the brain.
It does.
Refusing to accept this, Joel killed everyone in the hospital and rescued Ellie from the operating table. And when she woke up, he hid the truth from her by saying the vaccine attempt had failed. But let's just imagine for a moment, what if Marlene had not told Joel the absolute truth? Our alternate scenario would begin with a moment when Joel barely opens his eyes in the hospital. Let's suppose Marlene tells Joel that Ellie is in surgery, but hides the fact that the operation will be fatal for her. This big lie would completely change the course of events. Ellie would be taken into surgery, and as predicted, she would lose her life while the doctors extracted the cordyceps sample. This tragic moment would trigger a devastating emotional earthquake for Joel. Shaken by the news of Ellie's death, Joel would be forced to accept Marlene's explanations with numb resignation. As if his soul had been ripped from his body, he would leave the hospital as quickly as possible, taking Ellie's lifeless body with him. Meanwhile, the Firefly science team would launch an intense research effort with the samples they obtained, and within weeks they would isolate the mutation in the cordyceps that provides immunity and produce a trial vaccine. This development could have been a beacon of hope for humanity, potentially ending a pandemic that had lasted more than 20 years. The collective psychology would instantly shift, and news of a discovered vaccine would spread rapidly among the survivors. This hope would also bring impatience and tension along with it. Debates would begin over who would get access to the vaccine first and how resources would be distributed. Public sentiment would swing between hope and anxiety. The fact that control of the vaccine was in the hands of the Fireflies would unsettle the FEDRA administration, while the Firefly leaders would argue that the vaccine should be distributed equally to everyone. FEDRA commanders would want to distribute the vaccine exclusively under their own control. This struggle would take the rebellion martial law conflict to a new level. Although the threat of infection would decrease with the discovery of the vaccine, the nature of large-scale conflicts would change, giving rise to new tensions over resources and control. Generals within FEDRA, seeing the Fireflies' growing public support as a threat, would plan military operations. Thus, the world would be dragged into a war of ideologies and power vacuums instead of a war against infection. The Fireflies would begin, albeit on a small scale, the production and distribution of the vaccine in strategic regions. At first, the vaccine would be administered to healthcare workers and key individuals, and secret distribution points would be established in hubs like Seattle and Salt Lake City. People who had grown accustomed to FEDRA's oppressive control would realize, thanks to the vaccine distributed by the Fireflies, that they could step out into the world without fear of infection, and uprisings would break out in some quarantine zones, with people demanding the tearing down of walls and the freedom to travel as they wished. On one hand, as the threat of infection diminished, on the other, a society shaped by years of trauma would be thrust into sudden change. Alongside the joy of liberation, people would also feel the anxiety of an uncertain future. While Marlene led the vaccine revolution at the head of the Fireflies, she would struggle with the guilt of having sacrificed Ellie. Even though she was a leader who saved the people, she would be consumed by deep regret and sorrow. As the pains of this new order were being experienced, Joel, with his naturally suspicious nature, would eventually uncover Marlene's lies and painfully learn that Ellie had been knowingly sacrificed. This truth, he discovered, would turn Joel's inner pain into an unstoppable desire for revenge. Targeting Marlene and some of the Firefly groups behind her, he would track them from city to city to find the person responsible for the decision that cost Ellie her life, and eventually he would find Marlene and personally eliminate her. While the Fireflies were seen as heroes as the New World Order took shape, this would further fuel Joel's thirst for revenge, making the power dynamics even more complicated. As a result, the price Ellie would unknowingly pay could have marked the beginning of a new path for humanity, one where countless souls were saved from the grip of loneliness and walked forward with hope. At the end of this whole story, Neil Druckmann's words make us ask, what if life had been like this? Could the Fireflies really have produced a vaccine? Our intention was yes, they could have. In other words, Ellie's death would not have been in vain. It truly could have been a cure for humanity. As Druckmann said, the journey of the story isn't just for the audience to question the feasibility of a group being able to produce a vaccine, but for them to confront that moral dilemma. Because the issue was not only what was right, but for whom it was right. Joel's choice may have been a betrayal to millions, but for a lost father, it was about preserving the only meaning he had left. And that's why The Last of Us isn't just a survival story, but a story about people trapped between loss, choices, and conscience. What if Abby had killed Ellie instead of Joel? Joel's death was not just the death of a character. The real death was the death of the love and innocence inside Ellie.
Joel, get up. Joel, fucking get up. Please stop. Please don't shoot. Joel, please get up. No!
When Joel rescued Ellie in Salt Lake City, he killed Abby's father, Jerry Anderson. This event left a deep trauma in Abby's life and shaped her with a desire for revenge. Years later, when Abby learned that Joel was near Jackson, she assembled a team, set out, lured him into a trap, and brutally killed him right in front of Ellie. This event shook Ellie and led her to pursue Abby after Joel's death. But this journey of revenge turned into not just a physical confrontation, but a spiritual collapse for everyone involved. But what if Abby had killed Ellie instead of Joel? As Abby and her friends lured Joel into a trap at the secure house near Jackson, this very moment would become the turning point that opens the door to our new scenario. Let's imagine that, unlike the real story, Abby's hatred manifested itself in a different way. In this scenario, where Joel is about to be executed, Abby kills Ellie, aiming to destroy Joel emotionally. Losing Ellie right before his eyes, Joel would relive the nightmare of losing Sarah. This would shatter his fatherly figure and protective instincts. This moment would also be presented to us players as an extremely traumatic and cinematic scene. After this event, when Joel returned to Jackson with Ellie's lifeless body, the community would be plunged into deep mourning and shock. Ellie, being a beloved individual, would seriously lower Jackson's morale and increase their distrust toward the outside world. This situation could have led to the side quests in Jackson being more focused on defense and security. But the only thing left inside Joel would be revenge. He would become a man willing to sacrifice everything to find Abby and her friends. The Joel we control would now be tougher, more obsessive, and more dangerous. His melee animations would become more furious, his weapon choices more destructive, and instead of moving stealthily, open confrontations would become more prominent. Tommy would be by Joel's side on this path. However, the tensions with the communities they encounter would further complicate both the duo's relationship and the order within the communities. Dina, who stays in Jackson, would experience the mourning process deeply, and players would experience her story through flashback cutscenes. Ellie's memories would be integrated into the game through her. Jesse, on the other hand, would often clash with Joel's quest for revenge while trying to protect Dina, giving the player a sense of having to choose sides in this dilemma. When reaching regions like Seattle, Joel's actions would cause major rifts among groups such as the WLF. On the other hand, from Abby's perspective, killing Ellie would not offer her the easy victory it seemed to, because Ellie was innocent. After all, Abby wasn't truly a bad person either. She was just someone who followed her own sense of right, but was led astray by revenge. Even in the actual story, we saw her at times become alienated from her own actions and left alone with her regrets. In this scenario, Ellie's death would double the burden, turning Abby into a character judged not only from the outside, but also from within. And in a scenario where Lev found out about this, it would fundamentally shake his relationship with Abby. Lev would no longer focus on Abby herself, but on the consequences of her actions. Players could experience this conflict firsthand. Abby's playable sections would be filled more with guilt, internal monologues, and more dramatic transitions. Even Abby's indecisions could be reflected in choice screens within the game. Even her friends within the WLF would start questioning Abby's leadership, leading to divisions and loyalty tests during missions. Despite all this, even though hope for a cure was lost, Ellie was still a key for humanity. The complete disappearance of this possibility would, over the years, further entrench a social Darwinist order where only the strongest and most ruthless survive, making life even more complicated and brutal. Ultimately, what The Last of Us Part 2 wanted to convey was not just a revenge story. As emphasized in Wired magazine's analysis, Naughty Dog constructed this silent lie so that the player would confront a grim tale of revenge. They aim to make you experience the hunger for revenge, and then question that very feeling. That's why every loss, every breaking point experienced throughout the game left deep marks not only on the characters but also in the inner world of the players. Because The Last of Us Part 2 showed us that revenge has no end. Every act of vengeance achieved only opened the door to another loss. And at the end of this road, the heaviest price was not paid by those who breathed revenge, but by those who had to live with it. What if Ellie had killed Abby in Santa Barbara? In The Last of Us Part 2, the critical moment when Ellie decides not to kill Abby was another of the story's most striking turning points.
No. Just take him.
But what if, in that final scene, on the shores of Santa Barbara, Ellie had given in to her thirst for revenge? What if she had chosen to kill Abby instead of letting her live? What kind of consequences would this single decision have had in the game's quiet yet profound narrative? It wouldn't just be a story of revenge, but a tale of a soul confronting its own destruction and perhaps of being lost. If Ellie had killed Abby in that moment, every moment we felt like we were inside the game would have taken another blow. As we walked, our shoulders would grow heavier like Joel's, and every silence from Ellie would speak of an even deeper emptiness. Because in this game, silence was also a form of storytelling, and completing the revenge would only darken that silence further instead of healing it. The trauma that began with Joel's death wouldn't end with killing Abby. Instead, it would open an even deeper wound in Ellie's soul. The weight of the murder would leave an indelible mark on her conscience, dragging her into a great void and meaninglessness. Perhaps this would feed Ellie's tendency toward violence and push her down an even darker path. Because the cycle of revenge rarely ends with a single act. It usually breeds new hostilities and even more pain. This alternate ending would also shatter Ellie's closest relationships. Dina was already exhausted by Ellie's pursuit of revenge. Abby's death would cause Dina to give up on her completely. Unable to endure this spiral of violence any longer, Dina would decide to leave Jackson. Her bond with JJ would also weaken. Ellie might even choose to distance herself, thinking that someone so consumed by vengeance could never offer her a healthy future. Moreover, the Jackson community would also be affected by this situation. With Abby's death, tensions between the WLF and the Fireflies would escalate, and Jackson would be forced to face new threats. The game's mechanics would also support this dark ending. Resources would become even scarcer, and every bullet, every close encounter would become a brutal testament to Ellie's survival instinct. Because she would no longer be a hero, but rather a figure simply trying to survive, and perhaps losing her own humanity in the process. One of the strongest aspects of The Last of Us Part 2 was the emptiness of revenge and the difficult yet redemptive power of forgiveness. Ellie's decision to spare Abby conveyed this message in a universal way. If this ending hadn't happened, the story could have had a much darker and more hopeless conclusion. The message that revenge is not a solution, but rather brings more pain, would have been weakened, and Ellie's character development would have taken a different path. The narrative, strengthened by silence and mystery throughout the plot, would lose its meaning with Abby's death, and the themes of forgiveness and empathy would be completely erased. Every line of dialogue, every facial expression, every pause that Naughty Dog crafted with such meticulous care reached its peak at the moment Ellie decided to let go. Because some stories don't heal you, they simply remind you of who you are. And The Last of Us was a game that broke something inside everyone who played it, leaving a burden behind. If Ellie had completed her revenge, that burden would have grown even heavier, and as players, we would have felt even more alone and lost. Because this wasn't just the journey of two characters we controlled with a controller. It was a grand story. One we sometimes fell silent over in a single sentence, sometimes understood with just a glance, and sometimes buried deep inside ourselves without saying a word. After all this, if you were in Joel's place, would you sacrifice the hope of all humanity to save someone you love? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment.
If somehow the Lord gave me a second chance at that moment, I would do it all over again.